Hey everyone, Service Pack Sean here again as part of part two of my little quick and dirty explainer series stemming from the Macro Mischief video. So this macro I have up right now is the safe but not safe macro. If you recall from the video, essentially what it entails is that it takes the currently active document, the document essentially that's in the foreground of your SolidWorks window. It closes that document, but before closing it, it takes a quick note of its file path so that it can open a new document with one of these stored templates on the computer you're running it on, and then overwrite the original document. So again, not really too nice of a thing to do to a coworker or a colleague, but again, if they have backup files available, it can make for a pretty funny prank in the moment. So if you haven't watched the first video, the video on Boss Excuse Me, the first macro I went through, I encourage you to do that because I talk through just some integral tips on how to leverage the SolidWorks interface there. And we'll reuse them here, but again, it might just make more sense if you watch that video first. So I mentioned in the Boss Excuse Me video that in most macros what you'll find is before the submain section where it starts really executing code, you'll find this section that you will call the declarations section, where basically you're just making variables that you really choose to name for yourself. So I named this one SWApp to signify the SolidWorks application. This one to signify that I'm going to be using it to control the SolidWorks model on the screen. And then these guys down here to signify that I'm going to store the document path, and then I'm going to retrieve later the default part template path from the user system. So again, I could have named these really anything I wanted. It's up to you within a couple of syntactical restrictions that the VBA has, such as I don't think you can start like a variable with like a digit, just little things like that, just things within the syntax of the programming language that you can't disobey. But again, you could have named these guys flamingos. I always use flamingos as an example, but you could have said dim flamingos as SLDworks.SLDworks, and as long as you're using it in the right way and making the right calls, you could do that if you wanted. It doesn't really help the programmer. I always say whether it's you in the future if you're trying to read it, or someone else if they're trying to read your code because they don't really know what it's about, they'll have to do extra work to figure out what flamingo signifies. But again, just to illustrate the point, there's nothing special or hard coded about these things called variable names. So I mentioned in the first video, every variable name is in VBA going to, when you're declaring it for use and to be stored in memory on your computer, you have to precede it with dim. So dim is a keyword that will make a variable for you, and then you'll always see it's dim, the variable name of your choosing, as, and this is where we're typecasting it and telling your computer basically what type of data this variable can hold. So the SolidWorks API consists of an object interface that gives you access to the application, gives you access to control instant 3D, gives you access to control system options. But the top level interface, as I mentioned in the first video, is SLDworks.SLDworks. You're always going to see most likely a declaration call like this. This one's pretty much the second most common call you'll find when you declare a variable as type SLDworks.ModelDoc2. So we'll see ModelDoc2 is part of the SolidWorks object interface. It's sort of the next layer down. And when we think of models, traditionally when we see the word model, we think of what? 3D objects, right? We think of parts, we think of assemblies. The ModelDoc2 interface is pretty much the parent interface for not only calls for parts and assemblies, which it contains quite a few and very, very many. It also contains calls and interfaces for drawings, 2D drawings. So it's not just 3D stuff, it's also the 2D stuff as well. If you're familiar with programming at all, you'll note that the string type, you'll recall that the string type is really just a common data type. It's not exclusive to VBA, it's not exclusive to the SolidWorks API and leveraging that. It's a data type that is used to hold text. So I'm actually doing a dual variable declaration here where I'm declaring two separate variables with two separate names, so I have doc path and default part temp as string variables. Now I could have done these as two separate lines. I could have written out dim doc path as string, did a character return dim default part temp as string. Would have worked all the same, but again, it's just trying to save some typing here. So here's the subroutine. You'll see first we do what we did in the first macro, and you'll kind of notice the order of operations where the first step, what I want to do is basically take control of the running application of SOLIDWORKS. And that call is always going to be pretty much the same. But once I have that, once I've set my SWApp variable to be the running instance of SOLIDWORKS, I can then control that and pull from that running instance. So you'll see here this call is SWApp, and it's basically taking a command from the SOLIDWORKS SLDWorks or object interface, where it's setting SW model that variable type of model doc2 equal to the active doc in the running instance of SOLIDWORKS. So once I've hooked to the running instance of SOLIDWORKS, I can then pull things from it, including what its active document is. Now you might be wondering, and I kind of alluded to this earlier in this short video, what does active doc mean? Essentially what that means is the document in the foreground. So let's say I have the belt part open like I have right now in this running instance. You may have other parts of the conveyor, such as the legs, and some of the other parts open in the background, but this is the one I have open readily in the window. So if I'm sure that that's going to be the case when I run it, which I am in this case, I'm sure that I want to get the active document, the one that's in the foreground. You can use that active doc call and get this document. Next line of code, we see doc path equals SW model, since we've set that to the active model on the screen or on the screen. SW model.get path name. So this one's rather interesting because we see we're not using this set keyword. You only use set when you're using object type variables. So the SLDWorks interface, the SWApp variable by extension, the model.doc2 interface, and the SW model variable by extension. Those are objects. So in VBA, we say set object variable equal to this. Set object variable equal to this. With strings, with integers, we don't use the set keyword. It's just a linguistic convention. So in this case, we'll set doc path when we won't say set. You know what I mean? Basically, you just type out doc path equals swmodel.getPathName. So if you Google get path name, this is not an arbitrary thing. If you Google get path name, just as I've written it out here, no spaces, and you do a space and then do SOLIDWORKS API, Google will find for you the SOLIDWORKS help page and the API help for get path name. And then I'll tell you exactly what you what it expects it to return. It tells you the type of data it returns. It's a string, so that's perfect for returning to a string type variable. And it tells you whether, let's say, it just gives you the path or it gives you the full, the full folder path with the file at the end. So what we're going to do here is move on to default part temp. Now this one, you'll see we're taking from the application a user value for the SW or for the default part template. Now you can look this up again, get user preference string value, and you'll find a whole plethora of the SOLIDWORKS system options. Actually, in the API help, they give you the diagram that looks like the options, and I'll take you there now. So it looks like the options, and they basically go pretty much line by line in telling you what the appropriate API call is for all of these, and not only those, but for your document properties. So if you're looking to automate the changing of units, or let's say the image quality settings, the image quality slider, for example, you can do that, and it gives you a nice diagram look at which call will be required to control whatever option it is you're looking to control. In this case, getting the user preference value for the part template, that's sort of what we're aiming to do. So essentially what that pulls from is under default templates, this listing for parts. So I like to use this. Basically it's twofold from a productivity standpoint. It typically won't ask the user to find a template, which is nice. And for and it also is a reliable area. So most users you'll find it's just set to like a stock path, like C program data. Um, as we know, a lot of us will have templates all over the place. Some of us have it in a PDM vault. Some of us have our templates on a network drive somewhere. But this path's always going to sort of be there, or at least I'd say 99% of the time it's going to be there, and it's going to work. And so I like to use this call for that reason, because I'm able to get the part template, so I can open up a new part template, and then in the case of our uh, rather potentially deceitful macro, we can open a new document and then save over the actual stuff. So once I've stored that, what I'll do is I'll close the document that I've taken into docpath. Now I could have done SWApp close doc, SWApp active doc, but since I already have the full path in here, including the file name in docpath, since I passed it through in this step, I can just close it using that command. Again, close doc is a special command under the SLDWorks interface. Just look that up. You just type in close doc, SolidWorks API, and then Google that, and you'll find a nice page explaining how to use it and what it does. But essentially, we should expect it will close the document named here. All right, so then we have, I'm basically resetting the SW model variable equal to SWApp new document. So this is a really cool call, because this is how you make a new document in the interface. So the new document call, and you'll see it has some parameters. So I'm going to have it use the part template that I pulled in this step, and then there's a couple other pieces of information you have to fill in that are signified by digits. So again, if you wanted to kind of look through the full rundown of what new document does and what its arguments are, these little things are called arguments. You can look that up. Again, type in new document, SolidWorks API. That's pretty much a great rule of thumb. Whenever you want to look up a call, just type in the call space SolidWorks API. You're bound to find the SolidWorks API help page, which will give you a lot of useful information on how the call is expected to be used. Oftentimes you'll find calls have written macro examples, so you can see an example task that's sort of written out for automation as an example. And you may also find some good forum articles on the SolidWorks API forums that contain maybe people asking questions like what you're asking. Maybe how to appropriately use the new document call, or maybe issues you're running into with it. So there's a lot of good stuff just using Google. So down here, you'll notice I kind of do something funny here. I declare some variables after the declaration section. With a strip this small, and in general, when you're writing macros, not really a big deal. You pretty much just want to make sure that you declare variables before they're used, right? So you'll see SW errors, SW warnings, and this variable called bool status that I've created. They're all used after the declaration, so that's a pretty important rule. Otherwise, it won't be recognized. It goes very much in sort of an order of operations manner. So next, after I've declared these variables, and these variables here, SW errors, SW warnings, these are required as part of using the save as call. Basically, these are numerical types in VBA. So they just give you access to a wider range of numbers, and that's sort of what this call expects for save as for. Again, this you can find in the documentation for save as for as a call. The Boolean variable, this is true or false. A lot of times if you're doing error checking, I just named this one bool status because that's kind of usually what people will do, including me. I'll just name it bool status if I'm trying to get like a status feedback. So instead of naming it flamingos, I named it bool status, so it's no big deal. But this one, what I'm basically aiming to do, and you can do some checking methods after this, but I'm just doing, I'm trying to see if this returns a true. If save as for succeeds, bool status, after I kind of pass through that, will have a value of true. If it doesn't succeed, it'll have a value of false, and then I can look at the values passed by SW errors and SW warnings, or passed into them rather, to see maybe what happened in my code. Debugging is a whole other step, but yeah, I just want to give you a very quick synopsis on that. So like in our original video, if I press F8, you'll notice that allows me to step through the code and really get a cool idea of maybe what effect each line has. So again, with some of these variables, like when we see SWAP and we're setting a piece of information in our on our machines equal to the running application of SolidWorks, we won't see anything visible happen in the SolidWorks interface. It's almost like you figure like you're clicking on the SolidWorks interface. You're not really going to see much happen unless you click a button. So if I pass through that, you'll notice though, like one of the things you can notice is, and there are other ways to do this too, but you'll notice before I pass through SW model, it says it's equal to nothing because it's not holding anything. And then when I pass through it, you'll see that tooltip no longer appears. So it's equal to something, right? So we know that. Now this is going to be nice. So right now doc path is equal to nothing. It's empty. It's an empty string. Once I pass through that, um, if you hover over that, it's showing on my other screen, but basically it says doc path equals C users public documents SolidWorks 2018 samples. So it's giving me that full file path. So that tells me pretty much that it has passed through some data, and I can kind of use it to, let's say, do a save as. All right, so this one's kind of similar, default part template path. You'll notice if I pass through that, all right, so this tooltip's luckily showing on this screen, but it shows you that same path that I showed you in my options earlier. C, program data, SolidWorks 2018 templates part. You'll see it kind of trails off, but that would be .prt.dot. All right, so now we're going to leverage that SolidWorks running application of, or running instance of SolidWorks to close the document that has this path, which is the active doc. You'll notice now if I hover over here, it's of course going to show, but okay, so I've closed that. And then here you'll see I make a new document using the new document call, using the part template path that I've grabbed. Okay, so you'll see that makes a new part, nothing in it. You'll see it skips over all the variable declarations. These are basically empty variables. And you'll see with the numeric types, the default value is 0. You'll see with the numeric types, the default value is 0. If we look here, bool status equals false. Default value of Boolean variables is false. And then we'll see if I do the save as call here. It does the save using the, for this parameter, the original document path I took from the belt. And now if you look in the interface, you can see this is now the belt SLDPRT. All right, if I hover over the path, or hover over the name on the top center, you'll see that is the case. So again, be careful with this one. It can be rather destructive, but I'm hoping if you're looking to learn about the API, this was somewhat helpful. Feel free to ask any questions in the comments for the video. Again, quick and dirty explainer video. Hope that helped. Thanks.